Hello, everyone. Jerry Berg from the Swordsmanship Museum and Academy. I wanted to give a quick word before you watch this interview. While the audio is perfect for this interview, we did experience some video issues with the recording that are apparent here, such as heavy freezing. So please enjoy this presentation with the understanding that the video might be a little weird, but the audio is just fine. With that, please enjoy this presentation with Ben Smith, conducted in June of 2021.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are here with Ben Smith of Hilt and Cross Sword School, and also good morning, and soon also to be a published author. So,
Yes.
welcome everybody. This is Coffee with Warriors, and it is a very nice, casual Sunday morning interview where we will be sharing conversations and chats, in this case, with Ben Smith. So, good morning, Ben.
Good morning.
How are you
Yeah.
today?
I'm doing fantastic.
Great.
I had a wonderful day yesterday. Got back from camping with this little guy right here. And came home, had an afternoon sword class, and did a little bit more writing on what I hope will be the sequel to the book that's coming out in July. And yeah, it's been a fantastic week for me. So I hope it's been as good for you.
Here at the museum, we just finished up our first traveling museum setup that was specific to a particular culture. We were at the Asian Pacific Festival in Grand Rapids, and it was amazing. And that's why I'm down here in the basement. I was it doesn't look pretty elsewhere. We just have a big mess everywhere, but it was a great success. We had a cutting demonstration where we had katana and naginata and all those fun Japanese weapons. It was a blast. So it's good to have a nice, relaxing event like Coffee with Warriors to follow up with it. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about... Well, first of all, let me ask the standard Coffee with Warriors question. What are you drinking today?
Mexican hot chocolate. I got a taste for it a long time ago, back when I lived in Tacoma. I love visiting taco trucks, and their hot chocolate tastes a little different from what you usually have in like a Swiss Miss. And I just developed a taste for it back then.
Very cool. I'm actually getting a New Mexico Pinon coffee, so relatively close proximity. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your history, not just with your book and your works, but also with swordsmanship and martial arts and history overall. Where does it start? Where's the beginning?
Well, if we want to go all the way back to the beginning, when I was about 6 months old, my parents took me to see Return of the Jedi, and I have a few very vivid early childhood memories. One of them is of watching Luke Skywalker cut off Darth Vader's hand, and I just never got over it, ever. As soon as I was old enough to, hold anything, I got sticks and charged at the maple trees outside, and Grandpa called me Don Quixote. And I just never grew out of it. I've been, I did a number of different things. I did karate for a little while when I was a kid. And, but when I was 17, I went to college and found a good friend of mine named Robert Hyatt, who was practicing with a wooden waster. And I was like, what are you doing? That looks very different from what I usually see. And he showed me Talhofer's manual, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. And so I bought myself a couple of training swords and went outside and tried swinging them around and figuring things out, and fumbled around for years and years and years. I'd say that it wasn't until 2009 that I really managed to start putting together a decent training program. And that was about the same time I ended up starting, graduate school and teaching. And anyhow, about 2012, I came to Boise, started the Hilt and Cross. Wow, it's been 7 years, almost 10 years now. Yeah,
That's quite an accomplishment for having a school for 10 to 12 years in the world of HEMA. It's I mean, we always say that HEMA's a baby martial arts world, you know. That must be a pretty big accomplishment. 10 to 12 years ago, I might have just been thinking about how cool swords were on video games, you know.
Well, I live in a smaller city. It's growing rapidly, but I've got about 8 or 9 regular students, and a few new ones come by every now and again. Mostly we meet out of doors because one nice thing about Boise, living in a high desert, there's almost no rain. So we meet under some trees in a local park, and it's almost always beautiful, even in the wintertime. Well, it's still beautiful in the wintertime, it's just cold.
Wow.
But,
That's a good 6 months of the year that I wish I could have to meet in parks. We have to deal with horrible Michigan winters over here. So how?
yeah.
So tell me about. So you study a particular German instructor or master, if you will,
Yeah.
author. Well, can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about him and why
Well,
him?
that's an excellent question. So I specialize in interpreting Sigmund Ringek's longsword style. I recently begun, putting together curriculum and teaching Lignature sword and buckler. And I've studied a lot of other things over the years because I've been doing this a long time. I've studied, a little bit of Tellhofer's poleaxe, dagger fighting, George Silver, but my focus has been on Ringek's longsword. Not quite from the beginning, but since about 2006 or so. I didn't really have a curriculum developed until 2009, but I ended up going with Ringek specifically because I started noticing a lot of differences between the masters of the Lichtenauer tradition. You can look at, anyhow, so here's the thing about every single master has their own way of explaining things and their own way of teaching things. If you look at Paulus Cow, all of his cutting has essentially no extension. It's right next to the body, like what you see in a couple of the surviving Japanese styles. If you look at Tallhofer, on the other hand, his footwork is huge. There are plates in Tallhofer that show steps bigger than what you find in common sport fencing lunges. You have lots of arm extension. The body mechanics work very differently. I ended up going with Ringek because I liked his particular take on, hang on just a moment here. What I like about Ringek is he has a really beautiful combination of being succinct and having minimal redundancies in his system. Every single technique has a place and a purpose. That, and there was one other thing that puzzled me about Ringek. The Lichtenauer tradition, and Ringek in particular, has a very different layout for its curriculum than what you normally see. In most sword styles, you see a list of positions, a list of cuts, and then ways to put them together. And that's not how Ringek laid out his book. Ringek laid out his book with what you might call a table of contents at the front, listing all of the things that are in it. But then he transitions immediately to an extensive section on cutting. And you don't even get to the guards until more than halfway through the book. And that triggered something in my head that they were teaching this differently, at least in this particular style with this particular master, than they were in other places and times. And I wanted to explore that. And that's really kind of where the book came from. Because back in 2009, when I was, teaching on my own at the end of my master's degree, I started thinking to myself, I really want to try to not just replicate what they're doing, but how they taught it. And so that's kind of where the book ended up coming from, because I started writing down my work on the pedagogy as well, or the way you teach something, as well as how as well as how the execution happens. So around that time, I started learning a little Baguazhang. Got an instructor certificate from my teacher, Robert J. Arnold. You can look him up on Facebook sometimes. He used to have a blog called The Warrior Fox, and he teaches in Taiwan right now. But I started doing, studies of other kinds of international martial arts and looking specifically at what's the teaching method and where does it come from and did it change over time? And the answer is, yeah, they usually almost always did change over time. And but I think we can benefit a lot from trying to understand how they taught, because how you teach something affects the way the student learns it. It affects how deeply it gets ingrained. It affects how easily they can understand what's going on. And it also shapes the psychology, which is really important for a martial art. I would say, 3/4 of fights are decided not so much by skill and technique execution, but by the way somebody gets their head in the game.
One thing that I found really fascinating about what you said just there was that and this is, I personally think this is a bit rare in the world of historical European martial arts, aka swordsmanship, with a few other little sprinklings thrown in there. But you've been doing a bit of Eastern martial arts as well in there. Have you noticed, I suppose, any particular points that are either incredibly similar or incredibly different between the European and the Eastern?
Well, yes, absolutely. First of all, here's something that most people don't think of as being similar: is almost all of the Eastern martial arts have changed a great deal since the Renaissance era. If you look at the material that was taught back in the 15 and 1600s, you'll see significant differences in the way Eastern martial arts were taught, and as opposed to the way they were taught in the 1800s and as opposed to the way they were taught today. It's really kind of a mistake to think of them as a static thing, even though they have a much stronger emphasis on tradition and preserving those traditions in their cultures. But almost every martial art that I've actually researched, I mean everything from Yagushin Kage-ryu in Japan to Gao style Baguazhang, has changed and adjusted, and in some cases atrophied. Most cases, I would actually say the martial arts of the world have atrophied a little bit. And so that's actually remarkably similar to what we see in Europe. It just happened about 2 centuries later in the East, which is fortunate for us because that means more of it is better preserved. But that's probably the single biggest similarity, to understand that what you're looking at when you see a modern demonstration of an Eastern martial artist, to understand that it's not quite the same as it would have been 400 years ago. In some cases, they're very well preserved. The Japanese traditions in particular seem to be the best preserved of the ones I've had a chance to look at. I've looked at Filipino and Japanese martial arts a little bit, studied a lot of Don Drager's books on the martial arts of Asia. I know quite a bit about one Chinese style and a little bit about several others. There was a really great book by Peter Morgan, I think, called The Martial Arts of China and the History of the Martial Arts of China. And that was fascinating to look at, because he actually tracks the changes in their traditions from roughly he tries to go back as far as the Mongols, but there's not a lot of material there. But he tracks it from roughly the 1400s up through the 1800s. And it's a really good book. Peter Lorge, I think it is, Lorge. And anyhow, as far as there's one other big similarity, and this actually comes across a lot stronger in the Chinese style that I happen to learn. and that's the use of back-weighted stances, which you don't see a lot in modern HEMA. But if you look at a lot of the books, particularly the older ones, 133, the Glasgow version of Ringek, you'll see a lot of back-weighted stances, and specifically you'll see side-oriented back-weighted stances where you've got your weight on one foot, but your feet are oriented sideways to your opponent. And so you'll find a lot of the footwork that gets you around somebody moves through a stance like that. And that was tremendously similar. As for some big differences, well, in my particular case, because I was learning the Dao style, a relatively large single-edged sword in Bagua Zhang's system, and there are no parries where you intercept the weapon and hit your opponent with the same action. Everything was beat and strike, completely different from how you do it with a longsword, where everything is about intercepting and hitting at the same moment. And now that's just that one system, and I'm quite sure that there are others, but most Chinese swords, most Southeast Asian swords, and for that matter, most Japanese swords are quite a bit smaller. And that makes it much more difficult to do an intercepting attack, either with a cut or a thrust. So their styles are built around gaining time. In most cases, there are exceptions, but in most cases, their defenses are designed to buy you time to make a separate attack, as opposed to threatening in every moment of the fight. It's and in that respect, it's very, very different.
Very cool. Thank you for that. That I always appreciate the insight that those of us who have studied Western and Eastern swordsmanship and martial arts can compare and contrast. I absolutely love the similarities and the differences of human culture across the globe. But for now, I do want to bring it back into Ringek, and specifically the works that you have on him, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the book and about what can a martial artist hope to get from this book? What is the goal of us to acquire it, and what benefits can we get from it?
Well, my biggest goal when I started writing this book was to write the book that I wish I'd had when I started, doing this seriously back in the early 2000s. Not just a question of how to. I mean, Tobler's book has existed since then. I wanted to offer an updated interpretation, but most of what I wanted to do was discuss how to teach it. There's a few sections in the book that are on the basics of, introducing sparring, what types of longswords existed, how you pay attention to that kind of thing, how that should inform the way you teach. There's a lot of new clubs these days. There have always been a lot of new clubs in HEMA. There's new clubs popping up all over the place, which is just absolutely fantastic. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people a resource for understanding, okay, I've got this old manual. How do I teach something out of this? Not just how do I do the technique, but how do I teach somebody else to do the technique? And so I kind of did two things. First of all, there's a lot of analysis of the text, teasing out, hints about how they taught, but it's also a lot of comparison and contrasting with my experience in Eastern martial arts. Issues with, starting from out of distance and having a distinct approach phase when you begin a drill, having, very sparring rule sets, in working with live, sharp blades, as opposed to working with training swords. What kind of mindset do you want to foster in your student, and how do you do that? And so this book actually has a very limited scope, because Ringek has this very, very unusual section at the beginning with the Zornhau. That's the first strike of his system, and it means the cut of wrath. And he has 7 sections in this first under this first strike, and they're very, very different from all of the others. All the rest are about how do you execute this, and then the permutations. So the Krumpau, the Zwerchhau, the Schielhau, the Scheitelhau, all of those are about, okay, in this situation, use this and do this. In this situation, use this and do this. But the first section isn't like that. The first section has a number of general pieces of advice, and then it says, okay, what it's trying to do is it's trying to teach you how to fight with 1 cut and 7 permutations. It has sections where it says, learn how to be creative with this. It has sections where it says, if you're here and you need to change things up, do these other moves. But it does that. It builds a microcosm of the whole style in a single section with 7 moves. And it's just elegantly simple and beautiful. And it's really, really great at getting somebody from not knowing anything to being able to fight competently very, very quickly without overwhelming them with large numbers of things that they need to memorize. And I found it works absolutely brilliantly. And I'm really looking forward to getting back into competitions now that they're starting to hold them again. And a number of my students are going to be doing that too this year. And anyhow, I'm looking forward to seeing how it does, in that setting, because we've been kind of isolated out here. Most of the HEMA groups are out east or in the Midwest or down in Southern California. And it's at least a 300-mile drive to meet with anybody from here in Boise. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those ideas, how they work out for my students as they start going abroad. I've been doing this long enough that I've had people who started training with me and are well developed now, and some of them are going to be moving away and doing their own things. And that's incredibly exciting for me to see them learn and have this become a part of their lives. But back to the book. I wrote this book chiefly as a way to understand those introductory teaching phases in the beginning of the book. It only focuses on the Zornhau and those 6 plays and how you teach somebody how to fight with that limited material, which it's over 250 pages long with lots and lots of some beautiful photographs I got from a local photographer. And but when I was originally writing this thing, I was writing the whole Ringek corpus, and I was like, wow, this is over 700 pages long. I can't publish that. And my father told me, well, break it up into sections and and just try the first bit. And I did, and I was lucky enough to get a contract with Pen and Sword, and they're a military history press in Great Britain that were very interested. They've been publishing a couple of the works of Meyer, and they wanted to start seeing some new interpretive HEMA work. And I was lucky enough to do that when they were just looking for people. So that's kind of where the book came from.
That is fantastic. I was doing a bit of research on your book beforehand, and I saw there were all these UK publishers online. I thought, wait a minute, isn't he in Boise? So I'm glad that clarified it.
Kind of funny. Well, like Paladin Press, didn't they go out of business a couple of years ago? And I'm forgetting whether or not Chivalry Bookshelf is still around. I don't even remember if there are any more U.S. publishers for HEMA materials. Not any well-established ones, anyhow. That's a place where maybe at some point somebody needs to step up and see if they can't get another business going in that direction, because I think there's a big gap for a U.S. publisher. And
I believe Amazon.com is a U.S. company.
That's true. That's true.
So we did have a question pop up in the chat group, actually, from the Society of American Military Swordsmanship. So they ask, these are some great guys. I've been following them for a little bit, and they've been watching here. So it says, how do you see the future of competitive HEMA? Many martial arts that become sport tend to lose their martial effectiveness over time. Karate is a great example of a once complete martial art being watered down when adapted for sport and competition. I love questions like this because it gets
That's
us.
a fantastic question. Um, Here's the thing. My opinion is this: competition is good for this for our art as a whole for one chief reason, and that is that we need a context in which we can be fighting with each other, where you don't care so much about whether or not you're beating the guy or whether or not you're going to be friends at the end, which may sound a little callous, but they held competitions anciently in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance frequently, and that was considered an essential part of their training. Having said that, I think that the best thing we can do to avoid sportification is to deliberately de-standardize our rule sets. There should not be one global HEMA rule set that applies all the time everywhere. There need to be HEMA tournaments where wrestling is not just allowed, but encouraged and rewarded. There need to be HEMA tournaments where different kinds of blows and different kinds of circumstances are rewarded in different ways. We need to try to replicate the medieval rule sets. I think it's okay to keep a lot of the modern ones, but we should not lock in to one standard that everybody's trying to build towards, because when you do that, all the stuff that doesn't work in that particular standard gets thrown out or penalized. And the basic incentive of competition is to refine what you're doing for that specific context. And so if we can make sure that those contexts, A, remain contexts plural, and B, that they're very diverse, then we will be able to avoid a lot of the evils that come with modern competition, because modern competition isn't quite the same as ancient competition. When you look at the records of ancient competitions, besides the higher rate of serious injuries, you also see that they have a very different goal in what they're doing. It's about testing yourself. It's about publicity. It's about the capacity to, deal with non-compliant opponents. But it's less about it's a little bit less about the making a living thing, unless you're talking about the local level competitions where, sword schools would hold these things specifically as a way of, generating excitement in the community. But, and I mean, there were professional tournament goers, but they were also warriors who understood the difference between real fighting and tournament fighting. You have, classic examples like William Marshall from, the High Middle Ages in England, who won something like 105 tournaments, but who also fought in a number of wars, was involved with the training of a number of very important figures, and who, ended his life as a politician who still rode into battle on a regular basis. And you can't help but think that understanding what real combat is like would have informed the way they did their tournaments. There are a lot of tournaments these days that have a lot of restrictions on the types of equipment you can use, the types of techniques you can use, and some of that's a safety issue. Some of that's, we don't have mats that everybody can fall on safely, so we're not going to allow people to throw each other on the ground. Some of that is stylistic and aesthetic in nature, and that can be okay, but I find myself suspicious of that most of the time. And I find myself even suspicious of the safety rules, not because I don't think we should be safe, but because if you do that too long and you don't ask enough questions, then you get something like sport fencing, where people aren't actually fighting the way they would with real swords. And I mean, there is that looming over our heads here, If we standardize too much, if we make too many allowances, if we don't accept a certain level of risk that comes with good martial practice, then we run the risk of going that route. I don't want to offer specific examples, but I think we need to err in the favor of being open and allowing as much as we possibly can, and deliberately diversifying the tournament scene so that we don't so that we minimize those risks as much as possible while enjoying all the benefits of competition.
That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate your insight onto that too. I actually usually like to ask one particular questionable, I guess, hot topic question during these interviews, but I think the Society of American Military Swordsmanship beat me to it, because that is a hot topic in the historical European martial arts worlds. What do we do to avoid becoming a sport, and to keep this? I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Keep this historical, keep this scientific, but keep it true to the cultures that we're trying to recreate. So, for those of us who are watching who aren't part of the historical European martial arts world, this has been a hot topic for a while, and so it's really great to get this discussion going on these pages. So, or on these interviews. With that, is there a date coming up, or a roundabout rough date for when we can expect your book to hit the market?
Yeah, it should be coming out at the end of July. At least that's where it's listed right now on Pen & Sword's website. On Amazon, it will list a different date. I don't know why, to be perfectly honest. I think there might be just some communication going on between my publisher and Amazon. But I know that that Pen & Sword is currently listing that as July 30th. But that has changed several times in the last 6 months. So chiefly because of COVID restrictions, and also because of how that's affected the supply chain. Take that with a grain of salt, but it should be coming out at the end of July-ish.
Well, that works for me. So in the meantime, is there a place where our viewers can follow you and see the progress, or just get any updates, or even just discussions about Ringek in particular?
Yeah, so the Hilt Cross has a Facebook page. We're only moderately active there because most of us who are interested in our particular group, meet on a regular basis. And when we have discussions with each other, we're usually texting back and forth on our cell phones when we're not at class. But besides the Facebook page, I have a website which chiefly exists as a way so that people can, look me up and discover where I am and where I train and how we do that. Which has a lot of photos on it from the book itself, because those are the best quality ones I've got. And it was kind of odd because Pen & Sword asked me if I could specifically dress in historical garb for the book. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that request, but okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So if you actually see me practicing, I'm never wearing what I'm wearing in the book. But they were the best photos I had, like by a long shot, because I got a really good professional photographer, Play of Light Photographics. And I was like, wow, I'm going to put these up because they're just beautiful. And so there's going to be that. If you happen to see me wearing, hose and a jerkin, that's because that was what I was asked to do for this particular book, because they wanted to, first of all, they wanted to have a wider audience. They wanted to appeal to reenactors, to people who are educating people about this. And, honestly, I actually think, wearing historical clothing and historical shoes in particular is helpful for doing the interpretation process, because if you're going to be interpreting, sometimes the clothing will change the way you do things. Not often. In fact, a lot of medieval clothing is designed very ergonomically. It's very easy to move about. in medieval outfits. And modern clothing is much more restrictive in all the wrong ways. I actually hope that we can start getting, some better design, especially shirts and gambesons, so that because the shoulder movement is still not quite perfect on most of the modern gambesons that are available. And often when you raise your arms up, for an ox guard or a bon tag, your gambeson will ride up like 4 or 5 inches. And it's more just an annoyance, but I think we have a little bit of work we can do to improve that there. Sorry, I got off topic.
I was going to say, we're hitting 2 hot topics in one interview here with the, I can't tell you how many times I usually try to keep my own personal opinions off of the public videos, but I can't tell you how many times I've had the historical versus modern protective equipment debate at various levels of inebriation over the past few years. So with some high-ranking people too, which is something I try to keep to myself. But in any case, that is a very fascinating thing, and I personally love historical outfits because my own personal history in history originated after the whole video game thing with reenacting, and it developed into where we are now where I am now with just immersion with everything, but with heavy HEMA influence. And I think that reenacting and HEMA are long lost siblings, because at the end of the day, they both try to do essentially the same thing with different goals, trying to recreate a very almost mechanized, or at least with the idea of perfection in mind, recreating something that is essentially a lost art, be it how they lived or how they fought or how they dressed. And I think that it's a long lost sibling. That being said, I think Pen and Sword might not realize how few medieval reenactors there are here in the United States. Not a lot of them, and our Renaissance fairs don't really have too much of an interest in the historical garments for now.
That's true. I think this is chiefly because they're from Britain, and Britain has a very active reenactment community, and they wanted to be. They want this book to look in place at places like the Leeds Armory bookstore, and so it can set alongside those, and people can go, oh, so we have this book on castles, and this book on medieval food, and this book on medieval swordsmanship, and they wanted it to look in place on a bookshelf like that. I think that's where their logic was, because they have castles and museums and people who do reenactment all over the place in every part of the British Isles. And I think that was their logic there. Even though here in the US, we are missing being immersed in that culture because we don't have castles and museums with sword play. Well, that's not quite true. Boise actually has one of the biggest and best collections of Renaissance swords west of the Appalachian Mountains. It's the J. Cruz Earl collection. It's just a magnificent set. They have like 20 different Italian rapiers. They've got a German longsword from the late 1400s, early 1500s. They've got a number of Scottish basket hilt swords. They've got a few schiavonas, along with a random assortment of other swords that were part of a collection from a Class D weapons dealer who happened to donate it to the old penitentiary, which looks like a castle, except it's built in reverse to keep people in rather than to keep people out. And it's really quite fantastic. I have a yearly field trip there with my club to be able to take a look at that. Yeah, we're hoping that with a little time and attention, that they'll draw some more attention to that, because most of their work there at the old penitentiary is about the prison itself and the prison culture and the prison baseball teams and the rose garden they built in the women's section after they disbanded it. But they also happen to have this amazing collection of Renaissance swords, as well as guns from World War II. And they have a howitzer, for crying out loud. It's a really fantastic piece. but they have some literally ancient Greek daggers. They've got pole arms from the Renaissance era, very small set. But in the US, this is a big collection, relatively speaking. And it's really nice for me to be able to go there and to take my students to see it on a regular basis.
I highly recommend any HEMA viewers to go and see a museum that has actual historical artifact swords. It is just immersive. This is coming from the guy who runs the Swordsmanship Museum and Academy, surrounded currently by antique arms. You should do that. Wherever you might be, you might want to go check out the Worcester Art Museum, I believe, with the Higgins Armory, the one that you just mentioned. Just anyone. I mean, local history museums. We've got one just up the street in Rockford, Michigan, which is kind of I guess a little touristy town, and their local history museum has a Civil War cavalry saber. Just don't get your hands on it. I mean, yeah, ask permission.
Get your hands on it if you can, and if they'll let you.
But they're everywhere. They're surrounded by it. We're here in the U.S., where our history, in terms of recorded history, begins 300 years ago, with maybe a little bit beforehand here and there in certain parts. But when you're in it's a different world for those of us, or I suppose people in Europe, where the recorded history is so much longer, so much farther back. So I just get out and see some history, everybody. It's a fantastic thing. It boosts your connection to the world, to knowledge. It's great.
And you'll be surprised what you can find close to you. There are all kinds of things that aren't so very far away from most people. If you do a little looking, you'll be able to, I mean, if you ever wanted to see, the sabers used in the Civil War, or, odd things that were just imported or collected, get donated to museums all the time, and you'd be astounded what you can find if you look just a little bit harder. I mean, heck, in Salmon, Idaho, I was telling you about this the other day. There is a unusually inclusive collection of Asian swords that is in the Lemhi County Historical Society Museum. And I was privileged to have a chance to do some work on the history of those. And they have an efutachi, a Japanese sword that was worn by one of their noblemen, probably a member of the Uesugi household, probably considering its quality and the condition it was in, and the fact that it was actually used several times. It had some nicks on the steel from what looked like bone striations. And the tip was bent in the way that you get when you stab somebody through the face and hit the helmet on the other side. There's a very particular bend you get on the tip of the sword when you do that. And it had one of those. And anyhow, when I was explaining this to them, and they were like, wow, that's incredible. How do you know this? I said, well, I've been studying swordsmanship for a long time. And, oh, did you know that that's stingray skin here underneath the silk on the handle? And anyhow, they had no idea what they were looking at. But they had swords from Cambodia. They had kris from Java. They had some absolutely they had this fantastic set of a Chinese jin that was, it's one of those dual sword things where you have both of them in the same scabbard and you take it out and separate them. And you usually see those on Dao, not so much on Jian. And the Jian was actually treated with a lacquer and then had designs etched onto the lacquer all down both sides of the blades. It was really, really fantastic. And you just, little tiny museum in a town that's most known for its fishing in Idaho.
That is there's history everywhere, and it's so deep, deeper than you expect. So, with that, I think we're going to try to wrap it up. I know it's Father's Day, and we both have some Father's Day celebrations to get going. Are there any other thoughts or final things that you wanted to bring up and address to the viewers in the world of martial arts at the moment?
First of all, I'm a little bit of an introvert, but I'm trying to come out of my shell a little bit. If there's any listeners who'd like to contact me directly, feel free to post my email, and I'd love to hear from them. I'd love to hear any questions they've got. I'm looking forward to when the book comes out. I appreciate any feedback or criticism that comes with that. I'd love to be able the whole point of this was to start people talking about how can we be more historically accurate when we teach? How can we be more historically accurate when we practice? What are the benefits of being historically accurate? And what does that mean? And try to raise my own level of authenticity a little bit, and try to raise the quality of this, of my students' fighting capabilities at the same time. And I hope that people will talk to me and offer their feedback and criticism and their ideas. And I'd love to be able to hear from somebody.
Great. Communication is what we're all about here. So that's what Coffee and Warriors is all about. So we're going to snag your email. We'll put it in the comment section. So if anyone wants to reach out to Ben directly, by all means, that would be fantastic. Also, if anyone has any questions about anything that we talked about, also please put it in the comments. We're not going to be removing this video anytime soon. There's a weird lag between when you guys are seeing the live stream and when we're actually chatting about it. So we usually get questions about a topic that we talked about 3 to 5 minutes earlier showing up in the chat. So if we didn't get a chance to get to them during our live stream today, just comment in the chat. I mean, we'll get the notifications. I know I definitely will, and if it's relevant to Ben, I'll bring it up to him too, and see if we can get an answer going for you. So please ask questions, communicate, and if there's no wrong answer or wrong question, just throw it out there, and we'll definitely get to it. With that, Ben Smith, thank you so much for joining us today for Coffee with Warriors, especially on Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to you. And I hope
Gary, happy Father's Day to you too. Yeah, it's been an honor to be on here. Thank you very, very much.